and we're gonna have to unmute again. All right, mission accomplished. So I understand that it's about 11 a.m. We're welcoming everyone for this next session. We are speaking about Martha Root. We welcome all of you to this session once more on Martha Root. Welcome, welcome. We're on Zoom, welcoming people from YouTube, welcoming people from Facebook, and of course, those of you logging in to Zoom from clearwaterbahais.org. If you want to learn more, if you want to see more, you're welcome to go onto this YouTube channel, Clearwater Bahais, or go to the Facebook page for the Baha'i Center Clearwater. You can look at the previous sessions leading up to the point of the story we are now for Martha Root. To get us started, we welcome Miss Violetta Zane, our presenter, our host, the facilitator, the person who put all the material together. We welcome you, Violetta. Thank you once more. We're ready to get started with this session, and we welcome all of you participants being here on this journey in appreciation for all that Violetta has done so far. We all thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Let me share my screen and we'll get started on, wait, hold on.
Yeah, we see it. The slide is
Oh
up.
yeah, no, there's just a slight problem on my end. That's like a technical issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have
Yeah, we have
to,
multiple screens. You have to make sure it's on the right screen so you have everything the way
yeah,
you want it. Of course,
yeah.
of course.
Hold on.
So in the midst of that, if you haven't already seen those sessions from last week, we invite you to like and subscribe starting now and go back and look at those sessions on the YouTube channel that you're watching it from. You'll see that this is just one of several already. So we welcome you to visit the YouTube channel, explore, look at the past recordings, and surely you're going to learn quite a bit about Martha Root in her early life. So I
Yes.
think we
So
have it up
now
now.
we're good to go.
Very
And
good.
I welcome you to Martha Root, Part 3, Enkindlement, from 1912 to 1919, 7 years in the life of Martha Root. Chapter 1, Abdu'l-Bahá in America. Abdu'l-Bahá's arrival. Now, all the newspaper clippings you're going to see here are about Abdu'l-Bahá's journey to America. Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in New York on the 11th of April, 1912. It was a true media event. Reporters and photographers surrounded Abdu'l-Bahá and interviewed him about his journeys to the West and to America. They just loved Abdu'l-Bahá because they couldn't find anything about him that wasn't genuine, and they loved his wit and sense of humor and his spirituality and his incredible intelligence. Abdu'l-Bahá spoke everywhere, in shelters like here, in the Bowery in New York, in churches like this one in Chicago, in clubs, in universities like at Stanford. And Martha attended every possible meeting that took place in New York, Washington, D.C., and Chicago areas, including in Wilmette, where you see Abdu'l-Bahá here. She was present when Abdu'l-Bahá laid the cornerstone for the North American House of Worship on the 1st of May, 1912. This is him speaking to people on that day under a tent. In Wilmette, Martha was very affected by being in Abdu'l-Bahá's presence, hearing his words, experiencing his energy, feeling his spirituality, and watching him as he interacted with people. Abdu'l-Bahá not only expressed logical and uplifting ideas, but he showed that the road to universal peace was not only attainable, but inevitable. Abdu'l-Bahá in Pittsburgh. This is an article about Abdu'l-Bahá's visit to Pittsburgh, and that's the hotel where he talked. Martha was the one who invited Abdu'l-Bahá to give a talk in Pittsburgh, and he arrived on the 7th of May, 1912 at the Hotel Shenley. This is another photograph of the hotel. Abdu'l-Bahá received guests in his room in the hotel, and 400 people attended his talk in the auditorium. After his presentation, Abdu'l-Bahá met with lawyers and doctors. Abdu'l-Bahá's presence had transformed Martha Root. A friend from Pittsburgh, Alice Parker, who had known and admired Martha for years for her groundbreaking ideas, saw the change firsthand. And Alice said, "The contact with the spirit brought by Abdu'l-Bahá was truly a moving experience, and we saw a changed Martha Root, different from the practical, busy person known to the newspaper world. She was transformed by joy in the presence of the wonderful being who had come to Pittsburgh at her invitation." Abdu'l-Bahá's cure. Before I tell this story, I have to give a medical disclaimer. The remedy described in this story is not a cure for breast cancer. This story is a miraculous story of remission, and any effect has to be attributed to the person of Abdu'l-Bahá. So please do not try this at home. On the day Abdu'l-Bahá was in Pittsburgh on 7th of May, 1912, Martha Root, who was then 40 years old, met with Abdu'l-Bahá privately. Abdu'l-Bahá anointed her with attar of roses and gave her a white rose, which would forever after be her favorite flower. Abdu'l-Bahá placed Martha's head on his shoulder and showered her with his love, no doubt sensing her immense capacity for service in teaching the faith. During this interview, Martha confided in Abdu'l-Bahá about a physical symptom that would mark the rest of her life and eventually cause her death. She had found a lump or two on her breast. And because of her traumatic injury at the age of 24, she did not wish to see a doctor. Abdu'l-Bahá comforted her and gave her medical advice. He suggested that she use aluminum sulfate, which would shrink the lumps in her breast. Because Abdu'l-Bahá did not explain to Martha how to use the alum, she would dissolve it in water and drink it, which was not only unpleasant, but also not the most efficient way to use the medication. Martha's breast cancer would go into remission for 9 years until the spring or summer of 1921, shortly before Abdu'l-Bahá's passing. Then it would return, and it would stay with Martha until the end of her life. 29th of June, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá's Unity Feast. Race unity, possibly one of the most concrete expressions of the oneness of mankind, was one of Abdu'l-Bahá's priorities during his visit to America, and he organized a unity feast on the grounds of Roy Wilhelm's house in West Englewood, New Jersey, now Teaneck, New Jersey, on Saturday, June 29th, 1912, for which he sent out personal invitations in his own name, which you can see here. Abdu'l-Bahá contributed $100, $1,700 in today's currency, and set the date for Saturday, 29th of June, 1912, and Baha'is throughout the United States were informed of the event by telegram. The rest of the photos of this section are from Abdu'l-Bahá's Unity Feast on the 29th of June, and they're courtesy of the National Baha'i Archives of the United States. Martha Root attended this meeting, which would be a defining moment in her life. After Abdu'l-Bahá's address, the friends ate a delicious meal of Persian rice pilaf, a delicacy, and also rose syrup and many sweets. The green lawn under the pines was strewn with fresh flowers, making the lawn look like an embroidered Persian carpet on which Abdu'l-Bahá walked in the fresh, clean air with a gentle breeze blowing. Abdu'l-Bahá anointed the seated guests with attar of rose on their foreheads and later agreed to have 2 photographs taken of him. When night had fallen, the Baha'is sat on the lawn with candles, and Abdu'l-Bahá addressed them again. About 450 people attended Abdu'l-Bahá's Unity Feast in Teaneck. People from every possible background, east and west, north and south, rich and poor, white and black, all gathered together around Abdu'l-Bahá in unity. For the rest of her life, Martha would try to commemorate the 29th of June, the anniversary of such an unforgettable day. Now, this photograph is one of the 2 group photographs that were taken. Abdu'l-Bahá, as you can see, is on the left, on the extreme left of the photograph. This is the only photograph with Martha Root, with Abdu'l-Bahá and Martha Root in it. And Martha Root is very, very small in the photograph. That's her right there on the almost to the right of the photograph. The white roses of Persia. Another moment that left an indelible impression on Martha during Abdu'l-Bahá's visit was one of Abdu'l-Bahá's last evenings in New York City with Valiullah Varha, who you see here, future hand of the cause. Valiullah Varha was the son of Ali Muhammad Varha and the older brother of Ruhullah Varha. His father and 12-year-old brother, on the left is his father, and right next to him, close to the center of the photograph, is Ruhullah Varha. They had been arrested, tortured, starved, and martyred in Tehran 16 years earlier in 1896. Martha would later call the entire Varha family the White Roses of Persia. Abdu'l-Bahá asked Valiullah to sit near him that evening and recounted the story of his father and brother Ali Muhammad and Ruhullah to the Baha'is gathered around him with so much feeling and so much emotion that when he was done, he retired to his room, leaving behind a room full of stunned and silent guests who could hear Abdu'l-Bahá weeping upstairs. The 5th of December, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá leaves America. Abdu'l-Bahá spent his last few days in New York City giving talks to the Baha'is about how to live, how to love, and how to be united. Abdu'l-Bahá's visit, his powerful teachings on unity, his tender strength and wisdom, his vision of mankind's bright future had completely transformed Martha. This is a photograph also provided by the United States National Baha'i Archives of Abdu'l-Bahá on board the Celtic the day he left New York. On board the Celtic, Abdu'l-Bahá shared his last message to the American Baha'is. Your efforts must be lofty. Exert yourselves with heart and soul so that perchance, through your efforts, the light of universal peace may shine. After Abdu'l-Bahá had left, Martha threw herself into her journalism work and increased her Baha'i activities. She covered events for her papers, wrote articles, and visited her family in Cambridge Springs, caring for her father during his asthma attacks, spending as much time as she could with her mother, who had developed a heart problem. Chapter 2, The Camping Trip. Planning. Roy Wilhelm was not just Martha's spiritual father who had taught her the faith in Pittsburgh in 1908, he was also her closest friend. Roy was very close to his parents. I only found a photograph of his mother, Lori, and Roy and his parents loved Martha, and Martha absolutely loved them. It was great love in the two families. So the three Wilhelms and Martha devised a delightful plan. In August 1913, they set out on a month-long driving and camping trip through Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And all of the pictures you're going to see in the next two stories are of, they call themselves the Gypsies camping trip. The four friends had spent a long time planning their adventure, and everyone had a title and responsibilities. Roy Wilhelm was the chief engineer. Martha was the driver, and she was affectionately called the pilot. And Mr. Wilhelm was Mr. Wilhelm, Roy Wilhelm's father, was in charge of supplies, and Mrs. Wilhelm was the poet cook. The trip was an experience of pure joy and happiness. They were surrounded by gorgeous nature. Their souls were immersed in the beauty around them, and they enjoyed nighttime swims, morning feasts, and they visited friends and got to know and love each other more. Roy had a very funny, dry sense of humor, and everything became an adventure and a source of laughter and even occasional problems that were happily and joyfully resolved. Gasoline Gypsies 4. Roy and Martha had such a wonderful time during their trip that they co-authored an article called Gasoline Gypsies 4 for one of the most popular weekly magazines in the United States, Collier. And they included all the photographs I've shown you of their camping trip with their loaded car, their tent, some scenery, when they had to take boats, and just even a photograph of the four adventurers. Martha and Roy's article ends on a very happy note, showing you again Martha's wonderful positivity. The metropolitan gypsies, too, have become real comrades, drawn together by kindred desires and appreciations. Each happy best day yet of the journey stands out to them as passionately fine because of cherished experiences, wonderful scenery, madcap pranks in camp, delightful motor runs, and plenty of God-given ozone. Martha and the three Wilhelms would remain friends until the end of their lives. Chapter 3, Martha's first journey. A world tour. From the moment Martha became a Baha'i, she was intrigued by the idea of visiting Baha'i communities around the world, spreading the message of the Baha'i faith. As early as 1911, before Abdu'l-Bahá's visit to the United States, Martha had already written to him to propose a long travel teaching trip abroad, and Abdu'l-Bahá discouraged her idea at the time. There were significant issues with a Western woman traveling alone to the Middle East. Martha did not give up so easily and asked Abdu'l-Bahá again in 1912 during his journeys to America through Roy Wilhelm. But by 1914, she felt her time had come. Preparations. Now, I have a treat for you. Courtesy again of the National Baha'i Archives of the United States, we have copies of all of Martha's visas for this journey. Martha resigned from the Pittsburgh Post and lined up arrangements for other newspapers and magazines to publish her articles that she planned on writing. And then she began to plan her trip, like you see here, about half through Europe and half through Asia. She wanted to find Baha'i communities that were living according to Abdu'l-Bahá's examples. So this is Martha's passport. It was issued on the 18th of January, 1915. She's described as a newspaper and magazine writer, and in the top left corner, it lists all the countries that she's going to visit. She is described as measuring 1.60 meters, 5'3" 42 years old, with a medium complexion, brown-gray hair, and gray-blue eyes. Martha applied for visas for Japan and Egypt, Italy and Greece, and India. And of course, as would be common during Martha's life from now on, she was leaving at the worst possible time in winter, and also as World War I was brewing in Europe. It'd been 1 year since the beginning of the First World War. It was a dangerous period of history, and countries throughout the whole continent were gearing up for conflict, filled with hatred and antagonism. Chapter 4, Europe. 12 short days after her passport was issued, Martha left from New York in the dead of winter. She had absolutely no intention of waiting until better weather in the spring. And Martha, not having any intention of waiting, is going to be a recurring theme. Martha sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar. She visited Madrid and Spain. And I'm not sure the order in which the cities she visited in Italy are, but she visited the island of Sardinia, Genoa, Milan, Rome, Naples, and then went to Athens in Greece, and then her next stop was Egypt, and it would be her first time setting foot in Africa. But from Italy, she wrote 4 newspaper articles that I was able to find, which means there are certainly more. Pittsburghers form party in Rome. This was an article about 2 bridal couples who met at a hotel in Rome. Suffrage is not an issue in Italy now. This was an issue about sort of the war effort, and that putting women's right to vote sort of on sorry, I have the wrong slide for this. Suffrage not an issue now in Italy. Brilliant young woman, Martha, says committee at work in some sections. However, they are engaged in the war effort and putting issues of voting on the back burner. This one was America Sees Work for Orphans, about child victims of an Italian earthquake being cared for by Italians in villas. And then this one was a major one, and I think Martha was the one who took the picture for this one because she traveled with a camera. This one was called Yankee Airmen Engaged in Italy. Martha reported from Naples in this article, and it was the longest one she published in Italy by far. And then Martha traveled through Greece and arrived in Egypt. Chapter 5. Abdu'l-Bahá's gold. So this was one of the main reasons that Martha was in Egypt. Roy Wilhelm had entrusted Martha with $2,000 in gold, $62,000 in today's currency to give to Abdu'l-Bahá. And this is 1915 US gold coin. The gold was for Abdu'l-Bahá's humanitarian efforts during World War I. This is a 1916 photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá in Adassieh, one of his agricultural villages that he used to ship food back to Akka and Haifa during the war. Abdu'l-Bahá had been growing wheat in the Jordan and Yarmouk valleys, and he was purchasing all the grain that he could buy, and the gold was meant to help him continue these very worthy efforts. He was using camels to transport them from the Jordan and Yarmouk valleys back to Haifa and Akka. Unfortunately, once Martha arrived in Port Said, she couldn't travel any further. The British mandate in Palestine had been occupied by German and Turkish troops, and no one could travel there. Despite being stuck in Egypt, Martha still managed to get Abdu'l-Bahá's gold delivered with the help of the American consul in Egypt. And this is a picture of him, only Arnold. From Egypt, Martha also reported. During the 6 weeks she was in Egypt, from the 13th of March to the 24th of April, she was busy observing, writing, reporting. She was living in a war-torn world right now, and she was documenting what was going on around her and the ravages near and far of the ongoing World War I. She had a front seat to war preparations in Egypt, and she once witnessed 50,000 colonial and 40,000 French and thousands of British troops moving through the streets, and was astonished that the event wasn't reported in any newspaper. One of the main articles she wrote during this time was the Jewish flight from Egypt to Palestine. And these are photographs from the article that she published. It was a displacement of between 4,000 and 6,000 Jews who had been expelled from Jaffa and Haifa and carried on the USS Tennessee, an American ship, to Alexandria. In the piece, Martha interviewed several of these Jewish refugees on their terrible living conditions prior to their flight, the intolerance of Palestine, and had they been tormented. And she quotes a Jewish refugee saying, "The economic situation of Palestine is terrible. The large orange crop has been ruined because there is no petroleum to run the motive power for irrigation. Germans and Turks lay hands on everything. They seize such small plunder as a quarter of a pound of tea and baking of 2 loaves of bread. Candles or matches cannot be bought now at any price." So these are sort of the way that the war invades private life. Soup Kitchens in the Holy Land was another article that Martha wrote. It was a story of a Swiss girl who had been so affected by the war that she began organizing food for those who were starving in British Mandate Palestine. Her name was Therese Dreyfus, and she traveled from a colony from Jaffa to teach children a week before the war. And 2 months into the war, a woman came up to her and said, "2 children in our street died of starvation this morning." This was the activating element for Therese Dreyfus, and she started a soup kitchen that day, doing the cooking herself. But when she almost died from illness and all the work that relied on her stopped, she decided to go to Egypt and Europe and raise funds, and that was when Martha Root met her and wrote about her. Chapter 6, India. Mumbai. Leaving Egypt on the 24th of April without having received the letters that Abdu'l-Bahá sent her, which she would be transmitted later, Martha sailed down the Red Sea through the Gulf of Aden and then across the Arabian Sea to Mumbai, at the time Bombay, on the west coast of India. There is no record of Martha's stay in Mumbai, except the memoirs of Merwan Khosrow, who was a teenager at the time and never forgot the indelible impression Martha left on him. Martha's sweetness. Merwan and his father accompanied Martha to Pune, and one event that particularly stuck out in his mind as Martha was waiting on the platform for the train to take her back to Mumbai. And this is not a picture of Merwan Khosrow's father, but he says, "I saw Miss Root take out a comb and begin arranging my father's disheveled hair. India was at the time under British rule, and the whites looked down on the Indians as inferior. There were two Indians in the compartment, and both looked pleased at this sight. But the Anglo-Indian conductor of the train was shocked. He stood there staring and staring as if struck dumb. Such spiritual communion. Merwan's father asked him to serve as Martha's translator, so he accompanied her on visits to friends, and he noticed that his translation services were almost never needed when it came to Martha. As soon as any Baha'i saw her, their focus was entirely riveted on her, and they never listened to a word of his translations. He later said, "I had never witnessed such spiritual communion. I always felt an aura of spiritual fragrance whenever I saw her meeting a believer. She was altogether unconscious of the conversation, just a pure soul in a very frail body, and one whose memory can never fade." Chapter 7, Burma, Myanmar. After her stay in Mumbai, Martha traveled across the sea to Mandalay. She disembarked in Yangon and got caught up on the war bulletins to keep abreast of the conflict in Europe. She had just arrived in one of the oldest Baha'i communities in the world after Iran and Iraq, and the experience would be absolutely extraordinary. Immediately after arriving, Martha traveled to Mandalay. The energy and vibrance of the community and the dedication of the believers impressed her so much that she wrote to Roy Wilhelm, "If you think people work hard in Pittsburgh, you ought to see how they do in Mandalay." Paradise. Martha was the first American Baha'i woman to visit Myanmar. In Mandalay, Martha stayed for 10 days in the harem of the wealthiest Muslim man in Mandalay. He was a friend of the Baha'is, and she stayed in the apartments of his favorite wife. Martha's host was a very philanthropic man, and he spent 1/3 of his income on charity. He brought many distinguished officials to meet Martha. Martha's schedule in Mandalay was punishing. She spoke in many places, received a constant stream of visitors of all classes and religions, including an Austrian countess and Baha'is, Muslims, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists, and she almost never went to bed before 1 in the morning, getting up at 5. Although she was only getting 4 hours of sleep, she wrote to her friends that she was having a wonderful time, though she had no time to write or be alone. Martha would remember her time in Mandalay as a slice of paradise. The jungle village. One day, a telegram arrived for Martha from a jungle district where there were 500 Baha'is, all very poor people, and the telegram was short and to the point, 5 words long, and read, "Send the American to us." Sayyid Mustafa Rumi, the future hand of the cause, made plans to accompany Martha to the jungle village, but the American consul in Yangon was adamantly opposed to the trip because of the dangers of wartime travel, and Martha was not able to go. But the village was very resourceful. After Martha returned to Yangon, a blind photographer arrived from the jungle village that had invited her to come. And he left Yangon with 500 copies of a photograph of Martha to comfort the disappointed Baha'is. The goal of Martha's first journey. Now, this is the only photograph you have of Martha Root in Myanmar, in Burma. But in Mandalay, the experience was so amazing for Martha because she had finally found the object of her search through her around-the-world trip, a functional Baha'i community, spiritual and working according to the teachings of Baha'u'llah and the example of Abdu'l-Bahá. This is a close-up of Martha Root and Sayyid Mustafa Rumi, both future hands of the cause. Sayyid Mustafa Rumi lived at the Baha'i Center in Mandalay, which included a school, an orphanage, and a home for the elderly. The Baha'is contributed to a fund which paid the expenses of those too sick to work or unemployed. This and the next 3 photographs are all photographs of the Baha'is of Burma. The first floor of the Baha'i Center was both an orphanage and an elderly people's home. Mandalay had a fund to which Baha'is contributed, which was then spent on believers who were too sick to work, unemployed, or who had other needs. It was for Martha the perfect example of Baha'i life in practice unfolding before her eyes. Martha Root and Abbas Ali. In 1897, Abdu'l-Bahá had written to the Baha'i community of Myanmar and asked them to build a one-piece marble sarcophagus of the finest possible marble for the remains of the Bab, with very specific instructions. Mishkin Kalam, the famous calligrapher, was in Myanmar at the time, and Abdu'l-Bahá asked him to calligraphy Ya Baha'u'llah, O glory of the all-glorious, and Ya Ali Wallah, O exalted of the most exalted ones, on the sides of the sarcophagus, which you see here on this photograph, and it was completed and about to be shipped to Abdu'l-Bahá in Akka. The man who carved this priceless sarcophagus and later a similar sarcophagus for the remains of Baha'u'llah was named Abbas Ali. When Martha came to visit Abbas Ali in his home and pay him a visit, him and his wife and his mother were all in bed sick with malaria. His eyes welled up with tears when he met Martha because he had traditionally been the first one at the station to meet and interpret for Baha'i visitors. Now he was bedridden and was sad that he had not been able to greet the first American Baha'i woman to visit Myanmar. Martha gave him $10, $300 in today's currency, to help Abbas and his family in their hour of need. Abbas Ali passed away the day after Martha left Mandalay. From May to July 1915, Martha sailed from Yangon to Kolkata, traveled to New Delhi and Agra, then sailed from India to Japan. Before we leave Myanmar, 10 days in a harem. Martha was a born storyteller, and her article about spending 10 days in a harem in Mandalay got reprinted in a lot of newspapers. This is a collage of the 4 articles I was able to find, but from Martha's biographer, Mabel Garris, you get the sense that this was published in a lot of articles. The titles are very funny. New York girl spends 10 days in harem. Yankee girl spends 10 days in harem of millionaire Mandalay mule king, likes it and learns why wives get fat. Life in a harem. Great, declares a New York girl, and girl spent 10 days in a Mandalay harem. The opening of this one is really nice. This is the article, Life in a Harem's Great, declares New York girl. Miss Martha Root likes to talk about 10 days in a harem these days. Miss Root is just back from Mandalay. She was in a harem and she says, it's great. Of course, Miss Root was not a regular haremite. She was just a guest, making that clear. She went over to spread the Baha'i teachings. That's the religion which hopes to bring about just one big universal church, embracing all creeds and races, which I thought was a really wonderful way to talk about the faith in an unrelated article. Chapter 8, Japan. This is Martha's first visit to Japan. Martha's not in this photograph. This is a photograph of early Japanese Baha'is with Arthur Agnew and Agnes Alexander. Martha disembarked in Yokohama in June 1915, and Agnes Alexander invited her to come straight to Tokyo. Agnes Alexander, in the white dress you see here, was originally from Hawaii and arrived in Tokyo in November of 1914, just a few months before, at Abdu'l-Bahā's request. Martha and Agnes would get along wonderfully. Martha encouraged her to write articles about the faith, impressing on her the importance of the written word. Agnes arranged talks with her friends for Martha. The first journalist to ever publish Abdu'l-Bahā's photograph in Japan was a journalist friend of Agnes's named Miss Tanaka, who had already written articles about the faith. She was a really important friend of Agnes's. And this is the only photograph we have of Martha in Japan, with Agnes in a white dress at the back and Martha seated second from the left in the front row. There was also the first Japanese Baha'i, Kitukaro Fukuta, at the left, and the Japanese, the only Japanese woman to attend Baha'i meetings was Ichi Kamika, who is next to Agnes Alexander. From Japan, Martha wrote what was probably her most popular, most reprinted, and most talked about article on the upcoming coronation, which was a huge world event. The article that Martha published was called Japan and the Coronation, and it was a 6-page article in 2 parts published in the July to December issue of the American Review of Reviews, a very popular newspaper. The first part of her article was an interview with Okuma Shigenobu, the prime minister of the Empire of Japan. These are 2 photographs of him. Martha wrote a beautiful description of the prime minister, an athlete and a brilliant conversationalist. And Count Okuma told Martha, what the youth of Japan need more than anything else is pure religion, not the creeds of the Christians or the dogmas of the Buddhists, but the pure teachings of Christ and the pure teachings of the Buddha. I will look into the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and if they offer pure religion, I shall teach them to the youth of Japan. But part 2 of her article was really what got a lot of attention because it was about the coronation, the forthcoming coronation, the most important event in Japan that year, the upcoming coronation of Emperor Yoshihito and Empress Sadako, which was to take place from the 7th to the 29th of November. The article had many hand-drawn pictures that were provided to her by the palace, hand-colored diagrams of some of the apparel, and she gave very precise and elaborate description of the traditional enthronement ceremonies. This wasn't only a fashion scoop for Martha, it was reprinted in a lot of places. This is one place where it was reprinted in the Pittsburgh Gazette as a full-page spread in the Sunday issue. And here are 2 different mentions. One is accepting the Japanese throne, and the whole thing is excerpted from Martha's article. And the coronation of Japan is also a summary of Martha's article. So Martha had finally found a way to travel for the faith and teach at the same time, producing highly original content that was provocative and fascinating. So it allowed her to make a living as well as keep traveling. She also published another article while she was in Japan, American Sees No Menace in Japan. She interviewed the man whose photo you see here, who was a member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Willard Salisbury from Delaware. And he reported that Japan was not a risk for war and talked about the tensions of the regions and the rumors flying around about Japan entering the war. Chapter 9, Hawaii. Martha also reported from Hawaii. This is her on the passenger manifest on the Mongolia out of Yokohama and into Honolulu. This was Martha's first time visiting Hawaii and the first of, I think, 4 times of visiting the islands. And she spoke at length on everything she'd seen during her trip, like the flight of the Jews, and she praised Hawaiian newspapers for their fair and balanced reporting on world events. From Honolulu, Martha published an article for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette titled Tourists Give Their Views on China. She interviewed quite a number of Westerners who had just traveled to China, and including a female surgeon, a leading bishop in China, a reverend, a senator, the same senator from the previous article, and talked about the situation in Japan, China, and Korea, both in terms of international relations and education. And this is a repeat of what she had seen in Egypt that was published in Honolulu while she was at the Young Hotel. Then Martha sailed from Honolulu to San Francisco aboard the Shinyu Maru, the ship you see here, and Chapter 10, Home, the end of the first journey. Martha sailed into San Francisco Harbor on the 23rd of August, 1915. At 43 years old, she had just completed her first major journey visiting Baha'i communities around the world. She had traveled for 7 months and 29 days and visited Spain, Italy, Greece, Egypt, then traveled on to India and Myanmar. She had briefly passed through the Philippines and Hong Kong, stayed in Japan, stopped in Hawaii before returning home, and it had been a journey crowned with incredible success, both in terms of her Baha'i experiences and her newspaper articles. San Francisco. T.T. Root, Martha's father, had missed Martha so much that despite his 77 years, he'd crossed the country and met his beloved daughter in California. The Baha'is in San Francisco welcomed T.T. Root with so much warmth and love that Martha would forever after have a special place in her heart for all Californian Baha'is. This is a group of Californian Baha'is at an event in 1915. Back in the United States and fed by the wealth of her stimulating experiences during her 7-month journey, Martha threw herself into Baha'i activities with new zeal and vigor. So from August to September 1915, Martha gave a series of talks on the way home. And this is also now going to be a part of her life. Every time she comes back to America, she speaks about her travels and about the faith. I only found a few articles, but it's clear that Martha stopped pretty much everywhere on her way home. The first article I found was in Portland, Oregon on the 28th of August, just a few days after she arrives. She spoke on the 28th of August at the Central Library and on the 29th of August at Eilers Hall. Then she spoke in Salt Lake City at the Unitarian Church, and the newspaper article on the right quotes Martha from a talk about the faith and its principles. Between 1915 and 1916, Martha continued to work as a journalist in Pittsburgh. She became the editor at the Index of Pittsburgh Life, which is a testament to Martha's sort of fame and reputation as a journalist. She quit from the Pittsburgh Post in the early 1915. And 9 months later, she returns and she immediately gets a job as an editor. So from arrival in late 1915 to the end of her career in December 1916, Martha Root was the editor of the Index of Pittsburgh Life, but she also wrote a lot of articles. She wrote about flower shows, paintings, why imported cigars are better, pageants, firefighters, country club tournaments, Madame Montessori, the great educator, Pittsburgh artists, associations for the impoverished, the dye industry, gardens, hot weather hygiene, American manufacturers sailing to France to do business, Freemason meetings, a collection of paintings, a gorgeous country home, the horrors of polio, local artists, a lot of things, flower bulbs for Easter, the spirit of Thanksgiving. And Martha's last article was a spectacular piece about Child Frick's substantial and scientifically valuable collection of taxidermied East African animals gifted to the Carnegie Museum. And if that was not enough, in addition to editing and writing, Martha taught foreign students in the Department of Industries at the Carnegie Institute of Technology. In terms of Baha'i activities from this same year, between 1915 and 1916, Martha increased her intensity in terms of Baha'i activities. She held weekly meetings at the Fort Pitt Hotel, which you see in the slide. She wrote letters to women groups in Pittsburgh, wrote to pastors asking them if they would be willing to give her space in their programs to talk about the Baha'i faith. Fearless Martha Root. And 20 of the largest organizations responded favorably. So Martha was able to give talk there. There's a little tidbit from this period that I find really interesting because I feel like you can really learn a lot about Martha from this one little excerpt in one of her letters about at a time when she was working constantly and serving constantly and overcoming difficulties. This is sort of how she views being a Baha'i. Whatever comes to us, we can always be happy and we can always serve. We serve sometimes by our very courage in great trials. The disciples of Christ could resuscitate the world only after obtaining perfect renunciation. You must keep yourselves constantly engaged in praying to God and in spreading the teaching. Martha and her family. These are the front pages of all of the articles that I just showed you. Martha spent all the major holidays with her family in Cambridge Springs, and Thanksgiving was too busy in Pittsburgh with her work for Martha to attend that holiday, but she spent the weekend before with her family. Christmas was also a very special time as all the Root relatives gathered together. She loved spending time with her nephews. Martha's parents, T.T. and Nancy, had been married 48 years, and they were still just as devoted to each other. They loved seeing Martha during her visits and blossomed as she took care of them in their advancing years. 30 November 1916, the passing of Nancy Root. On Thanksgiving morning, on the 30th of November, 1916, T.T. Root made breakfast for Nancy and brought it to her bed on a tray. Nancy sipped the hot drink while T.T. attended to the fireplace in their room. Then Nancy drew a blanket around her shoulder and quietly passed away with her husband in the room. Chapter 11, End of an Era. Veteran reporter. For 15 years, from 1901 to 1916, Martha Root reported on everything from automobiles to the news, to major world events like the coronation, and to breaking news like the Harwick mine disaster, which was a huge deal in Pennsylvania. But most of her feature articles showcased both her skill as a writer and her never-ending curiosity about the world and the people around her. By 1908, Martha was covering theater with opera openings, and then she worked on society and finished her career at the Index of Pittsburgh Life. She was a seasoned journalist. For 4 years, from 1911 to 1915, Martha was the editor of the society section. These are just a few of the society sections during Martha's tenure. She had become an incredibly skilled writer, used to an intense publishing schedule, which explains why she was able to publish articles in newspapers as soon as she arrived in a new city, often writing them on the train or on the boat from one city to another on her trusty Corona typewriter. Covering Pittsburgh society for years had also given Martha something else. She had now the ability, tried, true, and tested, of interviewing anyone with ease. And she was extremely familiar with the higher and upper echelons of society, skills that would be instrumental to her during her travels for the faith, which is what we will be talking about for the remainder of the sessions on her extraordinary life. But on the 10th of December, 1916, Martha quits her job. She was 44 years old. After 15 years as a journalist, she stepped away from her career at the top of her career. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this article, which was published by the Pittsburgh Sunday Press. It's a long editorial on Martha's 16 years at Pittsburgh newspapers, emphasizing not only her talent as a writer, but her traveling around the world, her religion, and portraying her as a woman of great character. Newspaper woman gives up work here. Miss Martha Root, noted writer, quits journalistic field. Miss Martha Root, one of Pittsburgh's most famous newspaper women, known all over the world for her magazine articles on travel and for the past 15 years as a leader in local newspaperdom, has given up all her regular journalistic work and will leave for Cambridge Springs Wednesday to devote her whole time to the care and companionship with her father, T.T. Root. Miss Root's mother died Thanksgiving morning, as her father's affiliations are all with his hometown, Cambridge Springs. Miss Root has resigned from all active newspaper work in Pittsburgh to go there. She still intends to send articles to magazines at intervals. Miss Root's family is one of the first two which settled Cambridge Springs. She's a graduate of the University of Chicago. 15 years ago, she came to Cambridge. Her first newspaper work was as a feature writer for the Index, which she also conducted an automobile page. She quits the position as editor of that journal when she leaves Pittsburgh. During her first period of work for this publication, Miss Root spent 2 months in France writing of the automobile industry abroad. She rode once in a race from Versailles to Paris, reporting the race for American magazines. Later, Miss Root was employed at different times on all the Pittsburgh morning papers as feature writer and society editor. She spent 4 months in England, Ireland, and Scotland. During this time, she was the only American newspaper woman writer to report on the Gordon Bennett automobile races in Ireland. Sometime later, Miss Root made another European trip, sending articles back to American magazines. During the St. Louis Exposition, Miss Root represented Pittsburgh and New York publications and a syndicate. After the war in Europe began, Miss Root resigned her position as a society editor on local newspaper and made a trip around the world, being 10 months on the tour, leading magazine articles, accepted her special articles at that time. Miss Root is known in Baha'i circles all around the world as she visited a great number of colonies of this sect in her journeys and has spoken before many audiences on Baha'ism. She has helped innumerable philanthropic causes by her expert publicity, entirely at her own expense. She sends out each month a letter which reaches 100,000 women in the Orient. With it are enclosed religious clippings, paragraphs on the feminist movement, and on universal peace. These clippings are copied in newspapers and magazines all throughout the Orient. Miss Root has a wide circle of friends, including a great number of girls she has helped obtain positions of various kinds, especially in the newspaper work. She is always generous with her assistance and counsel and ever ready to lend a hand to any person who needs friendly aid. She is a woman of the broadest sympathies and most altruistic in character. Her friends hope that her resignation from local newspaper work will not be permanent. So I just love this article because it outlines her entire career filled with respect in an industry that was in 1915 massively male dominated and is just wonderful. Just wonderful. Martha in Cambridge Springs. Martha, completely ignoring her father's protestations, returned to Cambridge Springs to take care of him. This was the end of one chapter in Martha's life and the beginning of another. Martha's life in Cambridge Springs would be different from her life in Pittsburgh, but just as busy and active, and her two main priorities were teaching the faith and caring for her father. This is not Cambridge Springs Baptist Church. Martha also taught Sunday school in the traditional Root Baptist Church. One of her former students was particularly touched by Martha's classes and said, Martha was a wonderful teacher, clear, patient, wonderful. I really learned from her, and so did the others. We all thought a great deal of her. Martha also began teaching at Alliance College, the Polish school for young men. And she took great care of her father and her aunt, who was also aging. She visited the sick in town, brought them gifts and food. She had a real gift for comforting people, and she hired a cleaning lady to make sure the veterans' meeting place was sparkling. These gestures of friendship touched people deeply, and they never, ever forgot her kindness. Martha was very neat and tidy and took very good care of her beloved father. She made him pancakes. She went fishing with him. She went together to the theater, to baseball games, to the circus. But Martha also encountered real opposition in Cambridge Springs for the first time, and it was a painful chapter of her life. Martha had asked to speak about the Baha'i faith at this family Baptist church. Her father was the deacon. And when she spoke of progressive revelation from Noah to Jesus Christ to Baha'u'llah, the meeting basically imploded. One person left, calling Martha a perfect blasphemer, and her name was stricken from church records. She learned her lesson, though, and the rest of her time she would meet in small groups in homes in Cambridge Springs and never again speak at a church. In terms of her Baha'i activities during this time, Martha began collaborating with various committees and was asked to handle the publicity for the 100th anniversary of the Ascension of Baha'u'llah. And these are all articles in almost every state, in many states, in about 20 states, that were published about the Ascension of Baha'u'llah. Now, because Martha was in charge of publicity, I have to think that this is the result of her magnificent effort. All these articles published about the 100th anniversary of the Ascension of Baha'u'llah. At the same time, Martha was very involved in raising funds in creative ways for the house of worship in Wilmette, which was being built, and a great love of her life began. She discovered Esperanto around 1917, 1918, and the constructed language, which was unaffiliated to any country or culture, for peace-loving people and peace activists like Martha, was the ideal language. They wouldn't see English as an international language because English-speaking countries were involved in wars, but Esperanto wasn't spoken by a country. So this would be Martha's passion after the Baha'i faith for the rest of her life. Then, on November 1918, November 11th, 1918, after 4 long years, World War I finally ended. I just wanted to show you two pictures of Martha Root in 1918. And the reason is because we have almost no pictures of her in the early years of her traveling in life. And so these are really precious. Um, they're also precious because Martha is very happy in them and she's with her closest friends. So here is Martha on the left dressed in white. Now, Martha almost always dressed in white for events and for talks and for meeting important people. In the center is Fanny Knobloch, which you're going to see again when Martha Root travels to South Africa. And on the right is Julia Goldman, another of Martha's friends. This photograph was taken at the same time. And this is Martha and Harry Randall next to her. And in the back row from left to right are Richard Mayer, Rain Hopper Welch, again, Julia Goldman and Agnes Alexander. And they're standing on the veranda at Greenacre. Now, I just want to talk about a little something that happened a year before the armistice, the end of World War I, at the National Convention in 1917. Roy Wilhelm designed very thoughtful and beautifully put together introductions to the faith that he had written himself in the form of two blue booklets. The first one was very small, which you see here. It was 5 centimeters square, so 2 inches square. And the other one was much larger. It was probably half of a sheet of A4 or US letter folded in half. And so the Baha'is, with their fantastic sense of humor, called the two pamphlets Big Ben and Little Ben. Martha would use these booklets for years and translate them in so many languages. And she would distribute, like I think she distributed maybe 10,000 of them in South America when she went, but we're going to talk about that next week. Of course, once Abdu'l-Bahá received the pamphlets, he responded enthusiastically. And these are black and white pictures. And all of these pictures, by the way, are all, of course, you guessed it, from the National Baha'i Archives of the United States. So Abdu'l-Bahá wrote back, and these are pictures of the open booklets and exposed booklets, so you see the different sizes of them. His postscriptum was, P.S. The enclosed booklets have been perused. Send for us 100 copies of each. They are exceedingly praiseworthy. Verily you are engaged in serving the cause, and thus His Holiness Baha'u'llah is very pleased with you, and I am also satisfied and content. Signed, Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas. January 10th, 1919. Martha is going to receive a tablet from Abdu'l-Bahá that's going to change her life. And this is a photograph of Shoghi Effendi while he was the secretary of Abdu'l-Bahá before going to Oxford from 1918 to 1920, because he's the one who signed the letter as his translator. Excuse me. O thou enkindled with the fire of the love of God. Your detailed letter dated November 7th, 1918 was in these days received. The contents produced great joy, for they indicated a benevolent purpose, an untiring effort, and an extended tour around the different parts of the globe. Today, the promulgation of the ideal principles of His Holiness Baha'u'llah, which are manifestly recorded in the books, is the spirit of this age and the cause of the realization of assistance and confirmation. Assuredly, whenever thou holdest fast to it, in whatever enterprise thou mayest engaged, thou shalt find the doors of might and power flung open to thy face. My hope from the blessings of His Holiness Baha'u'llah is that thou mayest become self-sacrificing in his path, that thou mayest forget rest and composure, and like unto a swift-flying bird, thou mayest cover long distances, and in whatever land thou tarriest, thou mayest reproduce the melody of the kingdom, and engaged in songs and music in the best of tunes. At present, the whole world is prepared for the call of the kingdom. The past war has given rise to a wonderful capacity among men, for the underlying foundation of the teachings of God rests upon the comfort and the well-being of the denizens of the world and upon the establishment of universal peace. As ears are waiting the summons for universal peace, It is therefore advisable for thee to travel, in case comfortable journey is possible, to the different parts of the globe, and roar like unto a lion in the kingdom of God. Wide-reaching consequences thou shalt witness, and extraordinary confirmations shall be exhibited unto thee. Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet confirmed the direction of the rest of Martha Root's life. She would apply literally every one of Abdu'l-Bahá's words, travel the world, teach the faith, forget resting composure, and roar like a lion until she died doing just that. Next week, we're going to travel with Martha Root as she becomes the first Baha'i to open an entire continent to the faith, the continent of South America. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for being here, and see you next week.